You did everything right. You prayed before you chose. You picked the responsible path, not the reckless one. The one that looked wise. The one that even looked spiritual. And God let it fall apart anyway. No open door, no clear answer, just silence and consequences. If that's happened to you, you've probably whispered the question almost every believer eventually asks. If I made a good decision, why didn't God bless it? The answer has been hiding in a story you've read 100 times and never understood. Here's what most Christians believe, even if they'd never say it out loud. Good decision plus prayer equals blessing. It feels true. It feels fair. It's also not how Scripture works, because God isn't grading your decisions on whether they were smart. He's grading them on whether they came from trust or from control. That one distinction changes everything, and nobody exposes it more clearly than Abraham. God promised Abraham a son. Years passed. Nothing happened. So Sarah made a decision, and by every human standard, it was a good one. In that culture, a wife who couldn't conceive could give her servant to her husband to build a family through her. It was legal, normal, even in a strange way, an act of faith. Sarah trying to help God's promise along. Genesis 16 records her reasoning plainly. She believed the Lord had closed her womb, so she offered Hagar to Abraham, hoping to build a family that way. This wasn't rebellion, it was strategy. Abraham agreed. Ishmael was born. And here's what most Christians miss. This wasn't a sin of immorality. It was a sin of impatience, wearing the mask of wisdom. What happened next is surprising. God didn't strike the plan down. He let Ishmael live, even blessed him separately. But the covenant, the actual promise, moved forward without that decision being part of it. Isaac came later, through impossibility, through a body Scripture calls as good as dead in Romans chapter 4. Not through a workaround, through a miracle. This is where many believers get it wrong. They assume God withholds blessing because the decision was bad. But Sarah's decision wasn't morally bad. It was spiritually premature. It reached for the promise instead of waiting on the one who made it. Proverbs 14:12 says, "There's a way that seems right to a person, but its end is death." Not seems wrong, seems right. That's the trap. The decision that feels responsible, logical, even prayed over, can still lead you away from what God intended, if it's still you reaching instead of you trusting. Isaiah 55 puts it sharper. God's thoughts are not your thoughts. His ways are not your ways. He isn't only measuring outcomes, he's measuring posture. But that's not the real issue, not fully. The deeper reason is this. Blessing was never meant to reward your competence. It was meant to reveal your dependence. If God blessed every wise, well-intentioned choice you made on your own initiative, you'd never need Him. You just need good judgment. And good judgment is not the same thing as faith. That's why some doors that look smart stay shut, and some doors that look foolish swing wide open. Look at the widow in 1 Kings 17. A famine has stripped the land bare. She has flour for one more meal, enough for her and her son to eat, and then die. That's not a metaphor. That's what she tells Elijah, word for word.
Then a prophet asks her to make him bread first, before she feeds her own child. By every wise standard, this is a terrible decision, reckless, backwards. She does it anyway. The flour doesn't run out. The oil doesn't dry up. Not because her decision was strategically sound. It wasn't. Because it came from total dependence instead of self-sufficient control. Here's the mistake most Christians make without realizing it. They ask God to bless a decision they've already made on their own strength, instead of asking Him what decision He actually wants. Prayer becomes a stamp of approval, not a search for direction. You decide first, you pray after. Then you wonder why heaven stays quiet. But that's not how Abraham's story ends, and it doesn't have to be how yours ends either. There's a Hebrew word that explains all of this. Cheser. It means lack, need, the empty space where self-sufficiency runs out. In Deuteronomy 8, God tells Israel he let them hunger in the wilderness on purpose. Let them feel that cheser, so they would learn they don't live by bread they secured for themselves, but by every word that comes from his mouth. Sarah tried to fill the cheser herself. The widow let it stay empty until God filled it. That is the difference between a decision God can bless and one he simply allows. So before you ask God to bless your next good decision, ask yourself a harder question. Did you make it because you trusted him, or because you were afraid of staying empty long enough to find out what he would do? The wisest plan in the world cannot replace a surrendered will. So the next time silence meets your good decision, don't ask why God isn't blessing it. Ask whether it was ever his to bless in the first place.